All right, we're taking a break from the football previews for upcoming season this week, and we're going to talk some SEC basketball and SEC basketball check-in. And join me, of course, Blake Lovell. Check him out on the Southeastern 14, and then also the Established the Pass NFL podcast. NFL fan, Blake's got an NFL pod. Go check that out too as well. Blake, appreciate you coming on. Is that site name going to have to change here pretty soon because of Oklahoma and Texas?
What's funny about that, Phillip, is that we were supposed to have this done many, many weeks ago, and we just, as always, you run into technical issues, and you're trying to get everything in sync, where it's not just one thing. You're trying to change the name on like 8 different places, and so that will be done. At least, knock on wood, that will be done by July 1st when Texas and Oklahoma officially join the league. So that's our plan. Is we're like we have until July 1, and we're like we'll try to get it done before then, but if not only a week away now, so.
I think when the Oklahoma and Texas news years ago, when it came out that they were going to come to the SEC, I believe I had your partner Chris Lee on the show, and I asked him that. I said, "Well, you're going to have to go with the 16 now," and he just laughed. It was a good thing to, it's like if you're the ACC, the big, if you did an ACC, you just call it ACC. They don't change, even though they should change because it should just be the Coastal Conference because you're everywhere. But yeah, so it's a good time. It's gonna be interesting with those teams coming in. But so I want to lead off with this SEC basketball. I I thought about preferences with a clause in this question, but I'm just gonna ask it straight up. Biggest SEC hoops storyline this off season so far?
I think it's probably how many guys have chosen to return, and mainly probably just, I think you start with probably the top 2. And in all honesty, I could even go with, say, top 3, because I think there's also a good case that a guy like Walter Clayton at Florida, is just as important in terms of him returning to the Gators as Mark Sears returning to Alabama, Johni Broome returning to Auburn. I think that's the biggest thing, is because that has sort of changed the way people are going to look at the SEC, because with Sears coming back, with Broome coming back, I mean, Alabama, I've said many times, I think there's a great argument that you could make that Alabama should be the number 1 team in the country heading into next season. Auburn, I think there's a great argument you can make that they're a top 10 team, with maybe not a lot of doubt about that. So you're talking 2 teams that if you're projecting them to be top 10, if you're projecting one to be the national title favorite, which I know the tweet I put out, whatever that was, a week or 2 ago, that Alabama was the betting favorite to win the whole thing as of right now, then I think that just kind of shows the strength of the league. And then, of course, to kind of tie into that, it's not just the guys that are returning, but it's also, I think, as always, it's how many transfers you have coming in. But it's also kind of seeing what teams like Kentucky and Arkansas have done with new coaches. And we know that Cal moves to Arkansas. Mark Pope comes into Kentucky. But I think they both built just pretty tremendous rosters. And maybe that's it. Like, just overall, I think you've got a lot of teams. And to me, I mean, if we're many bracketologies, which we know was 9 months out, they don't really mean a whole lot. But I think it's realistic that probably at least 13 of these teams going into next season, maybe 14. There's a couple I have in mind that I'm not going to put in that category. I won't reveal who that is, as not to upset anyone just yet. But I think it's probably an argument that at least 14 of these teams could feel like they should make the tournament next year. It won't happen, but they feel like they put together rosters that can get there, even if you're talking about 3 or 4 bubble teams, maybe 8 teams feel like they're locks or whatever. That's pretty good for the conference, and I do think it all kind of started with Mark Sears, Broome returning, and then just seeing, again, everyone else and kind of the supporting cast you have elsewhere. I mean, even guys, right, like Colin Murray-Boyles at South Carolina. I mean, that to me is the difference in South Carolina being a team that if he's not on this roster, we may look at it and say, they probably take a step back. But now that he's still there, I can't, confidently say they won't make the tournament again next season because he's that good. And so, yeah, maybe it is just the returns of a lot of big-time players.
So you talked about you didn't want to upset anybody. So my next question, you may upset somebody. Just give you a warning. You just talked about these 2 teams, Alabama and Auburn, with Sears and Broome coming back. So I'm going to throw this question out there. Between Alabama and Auburn, who do you think's had the better offseason?
I think it's Alabama, and I think it's just because it's not just getting Sears back. I think that when you look at the guys that Alabama, I mean, look, Grant Nelson's come back. You mentioned him a second ago, but I mean that's a huge one too.
Mm-hmm.
Getting Nelson back, getting Stevenson, right? So all the guys were on that team last year. But I think if you're about the team that, you know, between these two that have added the most, I mean, it's, just by numbers wise, Alabama's added more players. I think they've added 4 or 5, whatever it is. Auburn's added, I think, 3. Because Auburn's older. They've got a lot of their guys coming back. But I think the Sears thing was just the difference for Alabama. But it's also, I mean, look at, Cliff Amore, who they brought in. I mean, he is you see this guy and you're just thinking, oh my goodness, like he is the next big, great Alabama front court player. And, he's paired with what has now become the next great Alabama front court player and Grant Nelson. And there's a couple guys behind him that are pretty good too. And so you think about it from that standpoint, obviously they're bringing in Darion Reed, very highly talented freshman. And I just think Alabama is the team that, like I said, to me, they have to be the answer to the question because they're the team that is projected by many to either be the favorite to win the national championship going into next season in a landscape where you're coming off 2 seasons where UConn won it back-to-back, and yet Alabama may be the favorite. That's a strange thing to think about, but that's where we are. And, again, I can make the argument that both teams, I've said there's no spoiler for me. Like if people are like, well, what are your rankings? What are your rankings? I'm like, well, it's still June. I like to give myself a little time, but there's going to be no mystery at the top of my rankings whenever I do have them, whenever that is, barring an injury. I mean, it's going to be Alabama 1, Auburn 2. And how I feel in the rest of them, I don't know, but I'm pretty confident that that's the order that I'll put them in. And so I would probably say Alabama will be the answer to that question.
Look at that Grant Nelson. Look, Alabama too. I thought last year. I mean, look, they made a Final Four run, so I mean, it was a great year.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like at times the lack of the threat or the fear of going inside on them, not having that shot block presence, which I thought they had the year prior.
Yeah.
Now with the transfer, the Rutgers transfer coming in, and then at times felt like Grant Nelson had to play center last year almost, and now you can kind of slide him back over to the 4, where obviously that's his natural position. Just with that part of Alabama too, now that they have that, like you mentioned, in the paint, somebody that can cover up a lot of stuff too. If someone gets beat, one of your guards get beat, man, there's just somebody sitting in the paint that can help you out with shot blocking, which again, I feel like didn't have last season.
Yeah, if you remember, like even last offseason probably, I mean, we all kind of said, well, like if there's the one thing you can pick out with this Alabama team, it's just the defense, and you didn't know where the defense was going to come from, and specifically it was inside. I mean, I don't know how many times I said last offseason, and it certainly seemed to play out that way. I don't get many right, but that seems to be one that a lot of us got right, where it's like, if this team had Charles Bediako, I'd have been so much higher on Alabama going into last season. And ultimately, they were able to, kind of overcome it because it was still a weakness. Like, let's not act like Alabama got to the Final Four just because of their defense. They got better, but that's not why they got there. And so they got there because they're just so good offensively and they were just impossible to stop, even if the defense also started to come along. But overall, I mean, that was an issue. And now you're looking at a situation where with Big Cliff there, I mean, that changes kind of everything about them defensively. And I think look, are they still going to be a better offensive team than the defensive team? Yes. But now the defense, I think there's a much closer gap. I mean, it's not as far and wide as it was last season where you look at the KenPom numbers and all that, and you're talking about, the number 2 offensive team, number 1 offensive team, 110th in defense. Like, it's not going to have that big of a gap this year. And, they're not going to win at all if there is. I mean, that's just the honest truth. I mean, somehow they got to the Final Four being a sub 100, defensive team. And that's a rarity. Like, that does not happen very often. In fact, I remember this stat that Max was talking about. I think it was Miami, who the previous year had gotten there, was the only team that had done it kind of as a sub 100 defensive team in KenPom or whatever it was. So it's just not something that happens very often. And so you don't want to lean on that trend continuing. You kind of want to make sure that you shore that up. And I think that Alabama definitely did that by adding Cliff Amore, and then, like we said, look at all the other additions they made on that roster. I think a guy like Chris Youngblood, very underrated. To me, he'll be one of the more important players, I think, for Alabama heading into next season. This is just, they're the complete package right now. As you look at their roster, they're deep at every position, And I mean, they've got they've got stars, and when you have that, you got a chance to go as far as you want to.
So you mentioned a lot of new players, but you didn't mention the one that may cause the most drama when they play their in-state rival, and that is Aiden Holloway. Wow, it just adds to it with these teams. It's one thing to transfer, it's one thing to transfer within the conference, but to go to your arch rival. But Aiden Holloway going from Auburn to Alabama. How do you see him fitting in? Because it seemed like there was just times at Auburn where the shot wasn't there. He kind of disappeared. Sometimes I watched an Auburn game, I forgot he was even on the floor when he even was. And then we saw Trey Donaldson would sometimes late in games would come in for him. And, Bruce Pearl take him out. But how do you see his addition adding to Alabama?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always interesting when you have a guy going from a freshman to sophomore year. We always talk about that freshman to sophomore jump, and I feel like with him, yes, like it became pretty clear that, and I think he mentioned it, or I don't remember what the wording was, but just about sort of being phased out of the offense or, whatever it was. And I don't want to put words in his mouth, but you could see it, like you said. You see Trey Donaldson getting more minutes. You kind of saw how the guard position would shake out. Denver Jones was obviously someone, that got a lot of opportunity. And, add to the fact that Chad Baker Mazzara kind of has a breakout year. You have a Janai Broom. Jalen Williams wasn't coming off the floor. And so those spots become tougher to sort of keep. And I think just based on how they were playing offensively, I mean, let's call it what it is. Like Auburn was not a great shooting team. And yet still, I mean, they used their defense to kind of push them as far as they needed to go, although there was still a really good offensive team. They just didn't have to do it from outside the way that other teams had to. But I think, to me, I always, no matter who it is, I feel like anytime you have a guy that plays or is entering Nate Oates' system, you have to be optimistic because you just have to assume that it's not always going to work for everybody. But with a guy that has this kind of skill set that can shoot the ball the way that he can, I think that there is clear upside going from this, the Bruce Pearl system to the Nate Oates system. That's not knocking Bruce Pearl's. It's just it was a team last year that won in different ways, and for whatever reason, it just did not click in terms of how he envisioned his role in the offense versus what it actually was. And so he'll have plenty of opportunity at Alabama because we know the way they play. They're very up tempo. He'll have a chance to get minutes because at a certain point, yes, Mark Sears coming back. Did that take a few of those minutes away? Of course it did, but there's still going to be plenty of chances for Aiden Holloway to have success in the system. And again, I always look at the freshman to sophomore. Guys are going to learn just by playing a season, and now you get a little bit older. You've already kind of seen this before. You're not entering every game as so, it's the first time I've played against this team or played against this type of style or whatever. You know what's coming, and I think that'll help him too as he kind of, gets more acclimated as to what Alabama wants to do.
Yeah, just maybe a better fit, like you said, with Alabama than, with Auburn. It's not saying the player's not good, but just, fit matters. And maybe perhaps that was the deal there. With Auburn, and you look at them, of course, getting Janai Broom back is just huge for this team. And they do look like a older veteran team. I mean, I think they're maybe older than some NBA teams. I'm not sure. I don't have the number on that, Blake. But they bring in JP Pegues from Furman. 36% from 3-point, 5 assists a game, 18 points per game. Do you think I feel like we talk about this about Auburn every year now? Ever since the 2019 run to the Final Four, is Auburn better at shooting? Are they better at shooting? We know they're good up front. Do you think they've got improvement there at that position?
I would think so because if you just look at what he brings, I mean, I think it's pretty, and that's the thing too. Like, the fact is, like, Auburn was actually not like a bad shooting team last year. Like, they weren't that bad. They had some bad shooting games. But if you think about what they were really the 3 or 4 seasons before that, they were not, I mean, they were very disappointing. But they took a jump up to where, I was looking it up. I was like, what was the number? I remember. They shot 35% last year from 3, which was not bad. I mean, because the years before, 31.5%, 31.8%, 32.6%, 30.6%. And so, like, again, I don't want to say that they were a bad shooting team. They just didn't need that as much last year. If you look at like the percentages of their points, a lot of their points came from the free throw line. a lot of their points came from inside because you had Broom and you had Jalen Williams, guys like that who could, find ways to make shots. You had guards that could get the ball near the basket and make, things happen. And so, yeah, like I don't want to go too far in the direction of saying they were a bad shooting team, but it is this year, I think, a situation where, look, if you can be one of the best shooting teams out there, that's always going to help your cause. Because the way I look at it is, if you just take the sample size from the past several seasons, right? Which, again, Auburn's three-point shooting in conference play last year was much better, I think, than just the overall numbers. I want to say that there were a couple games in there we look back at, like, all right, they started getting a little hot. And so, if you look at like what Kentucky has done, what Alabama has done, which Kentucky's different because Cal's not there anymore. It's Mark Pope, new system, all that. But, Alabama was able to get by. Why? Because their defense wasn't great, but their shooting was so good it didn't matter. You think about what Missouri did the year before. Take out everything that they, struggled with last year, going 0-18 or whatever. But the year before, why was Missouri the surprise team? Because they just shot it so well. Weren't a great rebounding team, weren't a great defensive team, but they shot it so well. And so Auburn's kind of been more of a, last year there were times where you looked up and said, Auburn's probably the most complete team in the SEC. They can do everything really well. And so if they can just get to that point to where, they have a couple guys, they don't, on a team like this that has Broom coming back, they don't have to hit 14 threes a game. But it's just having that consistency, and I think Pegues helps them there. Obviously, Baker Mazar can hit shots. And you just kind of look at Denver Jones, we know can hit shots. So I think it's just having that consistent threat from the outside. And if they can do that, this upcoming season, knowing you still have Broom, that's a good place to be in because, again, their numbers were a little bit deceiving at times last year. But there really was kind of that stretch in the middle where they started getting hot. They were making shots from outside. They were hitting 12 threes, 11 threes, 14 whatever, really an SEC play. Although they had some, I feel like I was trying to say that the separator for Auburn last year, it felt like most teams, they just had some bad shooting performances away from home. But at home, the ball went in the basket a lot better. And I think that's kind of the thing is you need better shooters if you want to have better shooting performances on the road. And I think adding Pegues and just kind of the makeup of this roster, I feel like they have a chance to break into that top 100 for the first time in 5 seasons or whatever.
And I've got the roster in front of me. The players are coming back who they've added, and I just look at this roster. Say a lot of guys. It looks like the same team almost as last year, but missing obviously Jalen Williams, who just ran out of eligibility. I'm sure they really wish he had one more year that he could play. So with his production, how do you see them trying to not replace Jalen Williams, but replace that production that he brought to the team?
Yeah, so people have kind of debated us on this because we did our guess the starting lineup with Auburn on a recent episode. And there were a lot of people saying that we didn't give Chaney Johnson enough credit. And, I without knocking Chaney Johnson, it's not that we're not trying to give him credit. It's just you're talking about a guy who only played 15 minutes a game last year. He averaged, 4 points, 3 rebounds, something like that. Like you're projecting and you're trying to say, okay, if I'm projecting him into a Jalen Williams type role, can he average double digits and average 6 or 7 rebounds? I don't know without seeing him on this particular team. But we know Bruce Pearl is very high on him. And I think he's going to get that opportunity. If you're talking about just a guy stepping into the 4 spot, you feel like right away it's going to be Chaney Johnson's opportunity. Because really when you look around, there are not a lot of other options. Unless you just take Chad Baker Mazar and say, well, that's his role. Although it's not. Like I think they're different players. So to me, it's going to be really Chaney Johnson's opportunity, but you have to go in knowing they're different players. And so I'm excited to see kind of how he continues to develop because, again, he's someone Bruce Pearl has been high on. He talked about him a lot last year. There just weren't a lot of minutes to go around because Jalen Williams was there, because Broom was there, and just the lineups that they were playing, there weren't a lot of minutes going around for him last year. And so I think he's probably the guy that we're going to circle and say, all right, is this the opportunity now for him in his second season at Auburn? Can he take that big jump? Because, he was down the stretch there in SEC play. He's playing 15 minutes, 18 minutes, 20 minutes, that kind of stuff. Does that jump up to 25-plus minutes per game in that kind of scenario? Because, they could go small if you think about it because they got a lot of good guards. But, if you're putting Baker Mazar at the 4 or something like that, Broom's still there, but I think rebounding-wise, you need someone like Chaney Johnson, who's a little bit bigger in there to kind of bang around in a very physical league, as we know. And so I think he's the person we're looking at here and saying if they're going to replace Jalen Williams, you got to go in knowing that they're different players. But you could see some of that potential, and you can see some of that breakout opportunity for him just with the way that he finished last season. So.
It was going to be quite interesting with him too. The development of Dylan Cardwell. Where's he going to be as a player coming up? Because it's a great luxury for Auburn to have him that you can bring off the bench when you need to get Janai Room some rest, or maybe he does get in a little bit of foul trouble early. You've got a guy that you know that can produce, that will finish around the basket, can rebound, play good defense. But can he take his game up to that next level?
Yeah, you'll appreciate this, Phillip, because as Max and I were sitting at the SEC tournament last year, right there, in the media section, courtside, our favorite thing to do was to watch Dylan Cardwell, because every time he'd go in and dunk the ball, which was often, he'd do the Hulk Hogan. He'd come down and he's cupping his ear and he's just like he's talking to the crowd. I mean, he's into it. And I think that's what I'm most interested with him, because, it was a lot of situations last year where most of the stuff he had to do was just, hey, go get a rebound, dunk the ball, and you're fine. Like, you don't have to take a lot of shots. His percentages were great because, he's not taking a lot of shots. Most of them are 2 feet around the rim. He's not having to take jump shots, that kind of stuff, often at all. But the defensive aspect, he's blocking so many different shots on that team. And I think when you have that pairing of Broome and Cardwell, defensively, that's why Auburn was so good, is because it was just impossible to score on them, or at least get good looks all the time based on, the shot blocking and rebounding ability of those two guys. And so, yes, just like with Chaney Johnson, I think it's a scenario where, look, if Broome had not come back, then we'd really be saying, all right, the key to this season is very simple. It's a 1-2 punch. It is Chaney Johnson and Dylan Cardwell. But now I think you're still going to have Cardwell somewhat in that same type of role. Could there be potential where you're playing Broome and Cardwell together a bit, and maybe that's you play two big guys, certainly possible, because I think Broome is kind of that guy who we've seen him kind of try to expand his game a little bit, step out a little bit more. Defensively, I think it's all about the matchups, which if you look around the SEC, there are going to be some SEC teams that are sporting, 6'10", 6'11" at the 4 and the 5, going big, with those kind of lineups. And so I think that's going to be really interesting to me. But, yeah, I think Cardwell has been it's wild to think this is going to be his 5th season in Auburn. But, he has been a very important asset for them. And I think that really for him, I don't think he has to do a lot different. I think it just is really just kind of, sharpening up certain skills and just kind of continuing to do what he does, because that's really worked well to this point. So,
and then in future years, you're going to deal with a 7'9" center at Florida too. So there you go.
Yes, that's true. Florida could be playing 7'2" and 7'9" at the same time. For all we know, Todd Golden, that may be his recipe for success. So
I was watching highlights. It's just seeing him not even have to jump to dunk it. Yeah. It makes me mad because I could never jump high enough, even in my best athletic days when I was in high school, to touch the rim. But now you see a guy that effortless, just reach your hand up and just do that. No jumping allowed. No jumping needed, I must say.
Yeah.
So I had 3 other teams I want to talk about. We've talked about Alabama, Auburn over 20 minutes. So I'm going to merge these into 2 questions for you as my final 2 questions. And that last thing with the Auburn, Alabama, who had been all season, I thought may get you in trouble. This next question may get you in trouble.
Uh-oh.
Who, as we're sitting here in June, if you had to project, who will have a better 2024-2025 season between Arkansas and Kentucky?
Yeah, this is a good one, because I think that what Mark Pope has done at Kentucky is a little underrated, and I think it's just sort of people are just seeing, all right, they don't have your usual star-studded roster the way that Cal's rosters were just completely loaded with, surefire future NBA talent and all that. But I think Mark Pope, you could argue, has, kind of compiled a better team in terms of just all the guys that he's brought in. I mean, Kentucky, as I look at their roster, they've got a great chance just based on what their rotation is going to be. Being one of the most experienced teams out there. 1 through 8, 1 through 9. I mean, they could go grad transfer. I mean, they're going to likely start all grad transfers. And, that's just like we said at Kentucky. Think about how different that is from the Cal era.
New
And so the
world, new
experience,
world.
right, is just completely new. And so the experience factor, I think, is in Kentucky's favor because they kind of have the pieces, I think, to be very successful right away. They've got some pretty exciting additions when you think about, bringing in Lamont Butler from a San Diego State team. They got to the championship game a couple years ago. Kirk Risa, we know, very highly touted player at Arizona before going to West Virginia. Kobe Brea, great scorer coming over from Dayton. Jackson Robinson follows Mark Pope from BYU. And you keep going down the line here. I mean, you're seeing a lot of talent on this team and a lot of experience. But I would probably say Arkansas because I just think Arkansas is more talented. And I think that this is kind of a season where I would love to see Cal add another player to the roster, although it seems like he's not going to. I would love to see him add another because I don't know about going with just 9. I think you should probably have a few more options there due to injuries and that kind of stuff. But I mean, when you think about what he's put together, and I've called it, Cal's revenge tour here. I mean, it kind of feels that way because he brings over Jonas Adu, who I know a lot of Tennessee fans completely turned on right after he left Tennessee. But I mean, Jonas Adu for most of last season was probably one of the top 6 or 7 players in the SEC, and he kind of leads a front court that now includes Trevin Brazile returning, who I think will have a great opportunity to shine playing for Cal. We know last year was a bit of a mess for Arkansas, but Brazile has NBA talent. And you've got John L. Davis, who I already have said I think will be a first-team All-SEC player next season. Comes over from FAU. We know the success they had there before Dusty May went to Michigan. And DJ Wagner, NBA player. You've got 3 highly talented freshmen, Boogie Flan, Carter Knox, but Billy Richmond, probably all future NBA players. Adu Thiero, one of the more underrated players in the SEC last year, breakout potential. And then you got Big Z, who we all saw, one game and we're like, hey, this guy's the next coming of Dirk Nowitzki. It didn't turn out that way that quickly, but we know the skills are there. So that's the 9 that he has on this roster. That's as good as anybody's roster in the SEC when you just look at it from a talent standpoint. And that's always been the case, though, with Cal, is that he's always had the talent. But I think this year he has something to prove. And I think the change of scenery could really help. And so I think there is a decent chance that Arkansas may wind up being one of the better teams in the SEC. Although, like I said, I would not discount Kentucky having a big season because I think what Mark Pope has done has been underrated because it's just so different than what people are used to at Kentucky.
Yeah, the Arkansas roster looks a lot different than they did when he had his opening press conference when he said, "I spoke to the team. There is no team." I was like,
"There's no one." Yeah,
that is one of the best quotes I think you'll ever hear a coach say. That's one of my favorites. I think a lot of people may want to just use that when their team loses. Now, there is no team. There is no team.
Yeah.
Real quick with Tennessee, of course, who was the regular season SEC champs last year, and they have a big holder of fill on their team, Dalton Connect. Just SEC player of the year, newcomer of the year. If there was an award the SEC give out, Dalton Connect won it. And I'm sure Auburn fans listening to me right now do not only want to hear, they're probably glad there's no Dalton Connect after what he did to them last year. So Kai Ziegler comes back. Is he kind of like the guy that kind of pushed this team through, or how do you see them replacing the production of Dalton Connect?
It's going to be hard. And in all honesty, I was lower on Tennessee than most people until about, I don't know, a month ago or 3 weeks ago, whenever they got Chaz Lanier from North Florida, because he is the kind of guy that I don't want to put a lot of pressure on this guy, but when you look at the scoring numbers, he can be a Dalton Connect type player. It's just, can he do it in the SEC? That's the question. It's the same question we have with Dalton Connect. And so I'm not saying he's going to be that, and probably if you're making a bet, it's hard to just go out and say this guy's going to be the next Dalton Connect. You probably would not make that bet, but the scoring history is there, and if that's the case, I think he pushes them now into probably being the team that sits right behind Auburn and Alabama. And I think because of what you said, Zakai Ziegler returning, it's like, I don't know, I felt like for a decade we had the same guys we talk about Tennessee. Zakai Ziegler, Santiago Vescovi, Josiah Jordan James. Well, not 2 of the 3 are gone. Ziegler's still there. But it's his, value at the point guard position, both offensively and defensively. I think that's going to be the difference in how far Tennessee can go. outside of just the obvious of how do you replace the scoring that Dalton Knecht gave you. And I think that's where Lanier, a lot it's going to be on his shoulders because Ziegler, a good offensive player, but I don't think that Tennessee necessarily wants to run everything offensively through him because you need to use what he does best, and that is his ability to facilitate and make the offense better by getting the ball where it needs to be, which sometimes is going to be in his hands, but in other times going to be getting it to someone else. And so I wouldn't want to put the pressure on him to have to go out and be an 18 point per game type scorer because I just don't think that's the role he needs to play on this team. That's more so going to be suited for Lanier. You've got some options in the front court with Igor Milicic, who comes over from Marshall. You got Darlin Stone Dubar from Hofstra. Like, those are good offensive players. And so I like the way Rick Barnes has kind of built this team up, and I think Lanier was the missing piece. If they did not have him on this roster, I would probably look at Tennessee and say, if there's a candidate for a team that's going to disappoint, it's probably Tennessee because I think you would worry about having those 5 to 8 minute offensive stretches that we were used to seeing several years ago where you're just like, are they going to score? And you don't know, right? And so now I think, though, it's a scenario where now that they have Lanier, the scoring could be good. It could be fixed, I guess you could say, because you're like, what do you do without Dalton Knecht? But I wouldn't put the pressure on him just yet to have to go out and do everything Knecht did. But I think the total package is there for Tennessee to be really good again. I just don't know if they're going to be the favorite because it's going to be hard for me probably to put them ahead of an Auburn or an Alabama.
Yeah, they definitely have some questions, but we're sitting here in June. We'll see what happens when we roll around in November and getting into the 2025 when the SEC play. It's a long way to go, but I felt like it was needed to do a little SEC basketball check-in. Of course, Blake, you are going to go to talk all things SEC hoops. If the listeners and viewers want to check out online, where can they find you?
Yeah, I appreciate it, Phillip. Like you said, you can check out all of our stuff, Southeastern 14 on YouTube, or you can search Southeastern 16. One or the other, you'll find us one way, depending on when you listen to this. So, so you can find us there. Of course, daily SEC football, basketball. Of course, baseball's wrapping up. We've got weekly podcasts on there. We've got daily videos, all sorts of stuff. So you can find it, Southeastern 14 there. And then, I'm on Twitter. Not as often these days, but you can find me on there if you want at the Blake Lovell.
All right, everybody, go check all the stuff Blake does out. And Blake, I appreciate your time, and I look forward to doing some time down the road.
I always enjoy it, Phillips. Thanks for having me.